One of the topics that we get asked about an awful lot is Patreon. Patreon for us here at dottotech has been a blessing. It's been a huge part of the growth of our channel. It's crowdfunding for content creators, and I have been asked over and over again about the best ways to get started in Patreon. I think it's a challenging topic because every creator is going to have a different value proposition and a different relationship with their community. But if you'll be patient with me, I will do my best at explaining to you how you can get started with Patreon if it fits in your life. Deal? Let's do that today on dottotech. Steve Dotto here. How the heck you doing this fine day? At dottotech, we make technology easy so you can do more. Now today we're going to talk about Patreon, which is a crowdfunding site for content creators. And first of all, I want to make it perfectly clear. This video is not designed to try and get you to support us on Patreon. But I will be having to use our Patreon campaign as a backdrop because it's the only one that I know intimately. Now let me explain to you first what Patreon is and how it fits in my business, and then you can decide whether or not this video is something which is going to be useful to you. In describing Patreon to others, in most ways I would describe it as a social network. It's really a meeting place where all of the creators and the supporters come together, and then it gives us a platform, a place that we can share our content, communicate, collect money, all of those sorts of things all happen on Patreon. And so when you first visit Patreon, they will give you an overview of what happens on the site, and then you can sign up either as a patron supporting individuals or as a creator where you start your own campaign, start your own page, and invite people to support you on Patreon. And now, typically speaking, the type of content creators that do the best on Patreon are musicians, artists, podcasters, people who are creating serial content that adds value to individuals' life on an ongoing basis. So you're constantly creating a steady flow of valued content, which your patrons, which your supporters decide is worth their monetary support to keep you going so that you don't have to spend all your time chasing money, and then they agree to contribute. Now, they can contribute in one of two ways. They can contribute monthly or they can contribute by the project. So if you're a musician and you release a song every 2 or 3 weeks, but it's not necessarily on any schedule, you can actually have people support you by the musical piece that you release rather than by the week. Other people will set it up so that it's a monthly monthly, I said weekly, but it's a monthly contribution. And that's the way that I have my Patreon campaign set up, is for people to support us on a monthly basis. Now, I think the tendency of a lot of content creators is to look at Patreon and say, oh gosh, this is terrific. Here's a place that I can go where I can make money to help support my business. And I'm going to tell you right now that I think that is 100% the wrong attitude. Patreon is about support. It's about nurturing. It's about creating an environment where content creators are sustained as opposed to rewarded, that might not be the right word either, for their creation. But the relationship between yourself and your patrons isn't that of a merchant and customer. Because they are supporting you for the work which you are about to do, not necessarily buying what you've done, there is an entirely different vibe, an entirely different energy to your relationship. And that's something to pay attention to. You probably aren't going to get it from my explanation here, but as you start to use Patreon, either as a supporter or as a content creator, you will start to understand the nuances of what I'm talking about. Now, the patronage itself, the support, what creators do is they create a kind of a contract between themselves and their supporters. And that contract is, I'm going to produce this kind of work for you, and you, in return, you are going to give me X number of dollars. Now, part and parcel of that work is I'm going to give you access to other things. There's something called perks that you set up when you create your Patreon campaign, which are the benefits that you're going to give to your community. Now, that benefit is obviously your core competency, your core work. So if you're a musician, the songs that you create, but you might create other perks at different at different dollar levels that people are going to be able to engage in as well. So for example, you might say, you know what, I'm going to have a monthly live Q&A where we can have a conversation, or I'm going to give you early access to my music, or I'm going to even say, engage you in the concept of the creation, post to your patrons, I'm considering these 3 versions of this song. This one is with the bluesy feel, we're doing a cover of some song. This one's with the blues. This one's kind of a ragtime feel, and this one's a jazz feel. I haven't decided which one to record. Which one would you like? And you let them get involved right within the actual process, the creative process. But it really depends on the artist and the creator, how much access they give to individuals. So now I'll tell you how the business came together for me and what Patreon means to me here at DOTTO, so that I'm not just talking about hypotheticals, but actual, real campaign and relationship with my community. And I got to tell you right away, my community to me on Patreon is tremendously important to me. They're people who have stepped up and says, we believe in what you're doing, Steve, and we're going to financially support you in that. And that nurtures me, not just financially, but that nurtures my very soul. It's really wonderful when you get a notification in email that says, so-and-so has decided to become your patron, and they've committed to supporting you at this much per month. Now, I've set my Patreon up very simply, and I recommend people to do this as well. Let me actually just take you into our campaign here so you can see. The dottotech campaign, the dottotech Patreon campaign has basically 2 levels of support, because you can decide what payment level people are at, depending on what access you want to give. But I'm of the belief that giving people less options is far better. Don't overcomplicate things. And this is a place that many people who create Patreon campaigns will completely lose track of what's going on, and they'll kind of lose themselves, because they'll create too many tiers, too many options for people, and people will get paralyzed by having too many options of what they should be signing up for. So I say keep it simple. In mine, it's as simple as can be. If you give me $10 a month, you get access to everything. If you give me less than $10 a month, you get my gratitude and thanks, but you get nothing extra. It's kind of that's where if you want to donate to just keep us on air, and if you're looking for perks, at $10 a month, you get all of the perks. And then determining what perks you give is a really important part of the equation. So I'll just take you quickly through the journey that I went on and how we arrived to where we are, and as it's doing very well for us. But you can take my experience and set it against your own opportunities and your own experiences, and determine whether or not it works for you. So when I first created Patreon, my Patreon campaign, I struggled with what perks to give, because we are a how-to tech channel, as you know, by watching us here on YouTube. So I didn't see that there was all that much value that I would give to people that they weren't already getting for free, because I was just going to continue to create the YouTube videos that we create. But I launched the campaign mainly to test and try out what was happening on Patreon so that I could do a story on it, so I could show people how it works. So I launched my campaign, and lo and behold, if I wasn't shocked, that people started stepping up and saying, I'm going to give you some money every month, Steve, because we appreciate what you do. Well, that, as I say, that was wind under my wings. That completely uplifted me. But it also wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to make a huge difference in the bottom line every month. But I recognized at that point that people were willing to step up. And if I could give them more, a better reason to be a patron, then there's a good chance that I could grow my Patreon following. So I started giving away my courses at half price to my patrons, and that gave us a boost, and giving away a few extra little online courses for free, and that gave us a little boost. But it wasn't until we started to do Webinar Wednesday, where we were giving away a free webinar each and every week, that I really hit my stride with Patreon. What we did with our Webinar Wednesday offering that we do here at DOTTO, and if you don't know, every week we do a free live webinar that we do a pretty solid training on. We give it away for free. We allow you to sign up. As a matter of fact, if you take a look in the links below, you can sign up for next week's Webinar Wednesday and take advantage of the training that we give. But then I would take the archives of all of those webinars, and we would only leave them public for 24 or 48 hours after the webinar was delivered live. And then I would take all the recordings of those webinars and I store them in our Webinar Wednesday archives, which are for the exclusive use of our patrons. So anybody who supports us on Patreon gets half price on all of the courses that we produce ourselves. they get my undying gratitude, but they also get access to now well over 70 free trainings that we've delivered over the past couple of years in our Webinar Wednesday delivery. And so now they get some extra real value for that. And since we came up with that model, which I think is a win-win situation, we still get to share information with the public, but there's a limited time window that they can gain access to it, whereas our patrons get access to that information for all time. It's just caused our Patreon campaign to blossom and to explode. That's the mechanics. But it's the subtleties of what happens when you create when you create a Patreon campaign. As you build a community, that community comes in and they gain access to the perks and to communication with you through a interface, through a posting interface, which is very similar to Facebook in a lot of ways. It's a social network, and so as I create new content, I post it here in Patreon, and all of my supporters get notification of the posts as they come up, and they engage in conversations with me. Now, as a content creator, the very first things that I answer of all of my inbox information, everything that I get in my inbox, in Gmail and YouTube and Twitter, any messages that come in, they all are secondary to messages from my patrons at Patreon, because these are people who've stepped up and are supporting us. These are my long-term supporters. So these people get 100% of my attention. And that's the nature of that relationship with your patrons at Patreon. It's a far more intimate relationship in this social platform than you have with people in any other platform. And that's kind of the magic sauce. I believe that the people who support dottotech on Patreon feel an extra kinship with me and an extra level of relationship with me. And I know I feel the same with them. So that is an overview of what Patreon is. It's a little more narrative and rambling than our normal videos here on dottotech, but if you are interested, I think we've given you a good overview of the entire process. Now, a few tips before we leave. A few tips if you are thinking about starting a Patreon campaign. The first tip is that I'm going to give you is go slow. Don't rush into asking people to pay for your content. Make sure that you've already proven the ability to create a steady stream of valuable content before you start going into Patreon and bringing people on board. I think that early momentum, having people come on board and give you money and support you generously from the beginning, is really important for your long-term growth. So you don't want to ask prematurely for support. So that's one thing. So take it slow as far as before you flip that switch and turn on the Patreon campaign. But once you turn it on, go whole hog. Make sure that you're creating fantastic content, supporting that community to the best of your ability. And before you even launch, make sure that you've reached out to every friend and family member that you know and that you've got them to sign up as a patron first. I think that the first people who come into your community, when they come in, they were going to be able to see how many people are already supporting you on Patreon. Nobody wants to be the first. So make sure that you've got 10 or 12 or 15 or however many people you can have already on board, and that you've already got like $100 a month in the kitty or $200 a month in the kitty, so that the people who are really going to support you long term don't feel that they're trailblazers and the ones that are starting you out, that they feel that they're jumping on a train that's already moving as opposed to getting it started. I think that's a really good piece of advice, and that's one that I followed at the start. And the third thing is just make sure that you support the heck out of that community, and that once you start on this process, do not fall off the bandwagon for a reasonable period of time. Put blinders on as far as how much support you're actually going to get and how much you're going to make, and say, I'm going to do this for a year. I'm going to create content. I'm going to nurture that community. I'm going to build it. I'm going to grow it. And then I'm going to look at the business after a year. Don't go into it thinking this is where I'm going to make my money and get my support. I believe Patreon will support content creators, but you need to have your other business ducks in a row. You need to have other real revenue opportunities and real revenue properties, selling online courses, giving talks, writing books, getting advertising on your podcast. You need those pieces of the puzzle as well. And Patreon can become a really nice supporting piece, but I don't think Patreon should be your main income source, at least for the most part. If you disagree, I'd certainly love to hear in the comments below, and there are going to be places where I'm not 100% accurate on this, but I'm sharing my experiences with Patreon. That's it. If you have any questions, comments, would love to hear what you have to say below. I do reply to each and every comment here on YouTube, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say. And if you want to make sure that you get me to respond even faster, well, become a patron and test me out and try a comment in Patreon and see how quickly I reply there. Oh yes, indeed, it will be quite lightning quick, I can promise you that. That's all the time for today. Till next time, I'm Steve DOTTO. You have fun storming the castle.